Been in the program for the past year. I have been part of the sustainable horticulture team, and she has been with edible landscaping. And now we're going to venture into our own team for the upcoming year.
Yeah, so we're really excited just to share with you guys that Learning by Leading is still alive and active. Everyone's collaborating and learning from their homes. And we're specifically excited against all odds to be working towards creating a new team, the 14th Learning by Leading team, that's going to be around tree conservation, planting, and even some climate adaptation. So we're just really looking forward to taking advantage of all the resources and the extensive tree canopy that our campus has, and Shields Oak Grove, and all our horticulture experts at the Arboretum to do everything from seed collecting, planting, propagation, to community events and tree plantings in the campus landscape and hopefully beyond. And one of the things that we're really excited about too is the chance to kind of be involved in the larger leadership initiative within the campus to work on climate adaptation and mitigation. And so luckily through our mentors, Emily and Abby, they're so awesome. They've been able to secure some funding to help with a special project to introduce new climate adaptive species and do some monitoring and hopefully kind of make an impact in the campus landscape and work towards getting specifically more climate adaptive tree species in our landscape. So we're really excited. We've been working on forming our curriculum and our ideas for a while now. And so we just want to be here to celebrate Arbor Day with you and let you guys know about what's kind of going on within the program. So I think now we're going to turn over to Abby. She's going to show us her tree planting that she's done in her very own backyard, and we're going to have a little chat about it. So let's see it.
Today we're doing a tutorial about tree planting because we're all sheltering in place and we want to make sure that everyone stays at home as much as possible. And one of the things that you can do for our planet for this week, for Arbor Day, for Earth Day, to celebrate, is plant a tree. And so I want to talk about three things mostly. The first thing is siting, so thinking about where you're putting the tree. It's really important. The next thing is planting, like a few different considerations for planting trees that you buy in containers from nurseries. And then the third thing is just staking and mulching. And so if you have any questions, feel free to message the Arboretum about them. We'd be happy to answer them if we don't cover something that you're wondering about. So the first thing is siting. This tree that I want to plant is Chionanthus retusus, or Chionanthus retusus, depending on who you are. It's a Chinese fringe tree. It's an Arboretum all-star. It's a wonderful tree. It's drought tolerant, medium to low water, and the reason I've chosen it for this site is that I have power lines above me. I have a fence right here. I don't want this tree to get too big, and so that's the first thing I would always recommend, is make sure you really take a look around where you're planting the tree and plan accordingly. Trees live a long time, ideally, and so you want it to have the adequate space for its whole life. Also thinking about soil and sun, this tree can take full sun to part shade, and so I get a lot of full sun here, but then also some shade, so this is a good option for me. It's a beautiful tree. It blooms right about now. It's probably about done blooming, but it gets covered in these beautiful white flowers. We've got them on campus and in the Arboretum, and then it gets these pretty blue berries. So that's the first thing. Second thing is planting. I've dug a hole here, and let me switch my camera on. Okay, I can. Great. So the hole, I'll just get down with the hole. The hole is about twice the width of the pot, but no deeper than the pot. You want the tree to be at the right level, the right depth. So if you dig too deep, then that soil is inevitably going to settle a bit. So you want to be sure to not dig too deep. Also, digging is hard. So if you need to dig more, you can always dig more, but you don't want to over dig at first. And so the next thing that's really important that I just mentioned before too is the depth of the tree. So a really common problem. They've done lots of studies. A common cause of death in street trees is, they're called stem girdling roots, but they're caused by trees being planted too deep, or one of the causes is trees being planted too deep. So you want to be sure, if anything, err on the side of planting the tree pretty high. So if you take a look in a book, can't really tell. But especially with a young tree, it can be kind of tricky to tell. The base of the tree should have a flare. Just like if you drew a tree, like a little kid can draw a tree and it goes like this at the bottom. You want to have that flare. That indicates where the roots should be coming out of. If you pile soil or pile mulch up around that trunk, it's going to send roots out at the wrong place. And so what I always do when I buy a tree, and this tree actually grew from seeds from the Chinese fringe tree in the Arboretum. So, and then I took it from the nursery so that I could plant it. So I'm just gonna dig down, because it's difficult to tell the flare. I'm just gonna dig down a little bit until I can see roots, and they're not circling around the trunk in any way, so I think that they're good. Their roots are coming out from the right place. And I'm gonna err on the side of planting it really high, and we can always add more mulch or add more soil if that comes to pass, if you need it in the future. So then the next thing is the roots that are actually in the pot. So in order to dump it out, I kind of like put my fingers on either side of the tree. Try not to break the top. That's important. So this tree has some roots. They're good because they're mostly going down. That's what we want. As soon as roots start to curl around and circle around, they get stuck in that pattern and they'll just kind of keep doing that forever. So I'm gonna loosen up these roots. This tree hasn't been in this pot too long, so it doesn't need a lot of loosening. A lot of trees in containers need a lot of root loosening. So don't be afraid to be pretty aggressive with the roots. People are always shocked by how much I disturb them when I plant, but that's really better than what would happen if you just left them. So you can really, you can pull the soil out. You really want to get it all loosened up, and think of it as like pruning and you can prune, you can cut with pruners or with like a weeding knife. I do sometimes. If it's a really big tree, I've used pruning saws on roots that are really thick and circling. You want to stop them before they start to circle. So because this one is ready to go, I'm gonna just loosen gently with my fingers and then put it in the hole. And then we're gonna check to make sure it's at the right depth. Okay, so far it looks pretty good. You probably can't see that well, but I'm just gonna check the depth here, and it looks pretty good. So I'm then gonna look at the direction that it's facing, and like if it has any branching, you want to make sure to set it up the right way. The way I'm gonna do it, this one is pretty straightforward, so I think we're good just like that. I'm gonna start backfilling a little bit so to hold it up in place and push down. You want to make sure you weed a significant area around where the tree is going, because you don't want those weeds to compete with the root system. You can put a tarp out to dig your hole. I put my soil in this bucket. Just gonna backfill there. And make sure that when you're putting the soil back in, you're not like leaning the tree one direction or another. And you want to kind of compact it a little bit, not like tremendously, but you want it to be stable in the hole. That's pretty important. And then also taking a look back, like, is it leaning super hard one way or the other? This tree is really young, so even if it does lean a little bit one way or the other when I plant it, it'll correct itself. And that actually brings me to staking, which is a question that a lot of people have. I'm not going to stake this tree. So the reason I'm not going to stake this tree is because it's not super tall compared to its root size, and so, or its root ball size, like the pot that it was grown in, and so it's not really unsturdy, and it's not at risk of blowing over in a high winds. It's right next to this fence. It's in my pretty protected backyard, so I'm not really worried about that at all. So that's one reason that you would stake, is if it's going in a high wind area and it's really top heavy. Another reason you would stake is if you bought it and it had one of those stakes right up against the tree and it was tied really tightly to the tree. Sometimes when you take that stake off, which you should take that stake off, the tree hasn't developed its own strength basically to stand up on its own, and so it'll just like flop right over. So let's say it's like flopped over like this. You can loosely stake it, and we're gonna share some, if you stick around for the conversation that I have with Annika and Iris, we're gonna share some diagrams about how you do that, because there's definitely a right way to stake, and usually people do the wrong way. So you wanna stake it as low as possible and make sure that it in no way is gonna injure the tree. I like to err on the side, that's how you say that. I like to err on the side of not staking. Staking is really prevalent, and it's sometimes completely necessary, but a lot of times it's not. So this tree's pretty much done. I'm just double checking that it's the right height, and if it's not, then I'll literally dig it back out and start over, because that's super important for the long-term health of the tree. The last thing I'm gonna do is mulch, and last two things I'm gonna do is mulch and water. So mulch, be sure to not put it all like around the trunk. You just want to give it a ample, generous mulch. I also like to make like a little bit of a moat, like a little bit higher on the sides of mulch, so that when you water, which you should do immediately after planting anything, it will kind of collect there, but it's not too deep. The plant isn't so deep that it's just collecting right at the base of the trunk. Okay, I'm sure I forgot lots of things, so stick around for the conversation that I'm about to have in the future with Annika and Iris. I hope you all have a great Earth Day and that you're safe and sheltering at home. And stay home, please, for our healthcare workers and our essential workers who are working so hard to keep us safe.
Add to the resources and then maybe elaborate on some things that perhaps were skipped over, but I can't think of too much because Abby went in great detail, but that's where we're going to start.
Yeah, so I think Abby, you started off, really thinking about a lot of good considerations with, fencing and house and the siding. And just so you guys know, if you really are not as aware of, say, underground utility lines or, other regulations that PG&E might have, they definitely have resources, especially regarding like distribution poles and kind of how far you should stay away from those. And if you do want to mark your lines, you can call 811 and they should be able to do it for free. And I think they say 2 working days before you plan to dig is when they want to come out and do it. And so they're really helpful. They can label, like where your water's coming from and all that. So especially if you're not really quite sure what's down there, that's a good way to go about it.
Even if you think you know what's down there, you probably
right.
don't. So it's definitely recommended.
Right, yeah,
and I definitely forgot to mention that.
Yeah, sometimes I know I've done plantings where residents are like surprised. They didn't know that that's where things went. So definitely if you have
everything for you.
Yeah. And yeah, this little diagram here, it's from the Arboretum Foundation. You can find it on their website. And there's some guidance there, but I think, Abby was saying, anything like small, like maybe 20 feet at maturity, even under a line should be good to go. Should we move
and
on?
I will say that the Arboretum All-Stars, if you look on our website for those, the trees are organized by size. So that's always like your first consideration, I would say, is sunlight and height, full maturity size.
Yes, and roots at maturity too, considering how they'll spread, because they're usually more extensive. They're gonna have a wider diameter than the crown. All right.
Is there anything else we want to say about picking a site? Did we forget anything?
What'd I forget?
I think we're good.
Okay.
We're going to
go to the next thing.
So digging a hole now. As Abby mentioned, you're going to make a hole that's as deep as the root ball itself, and then you want to go either twice or 3 times wider than the root ball. Yeah, did you want to walk us through this, Annika, maybe?
I mean, yeah, I think everything Abby said was really on point. You know, and I think Abby, your tree was so small and had been in the pot for you know, not that long, so it was really like an ideal situation there. I think you do want to be a little bit more diligent and concerned about, you know, larger trees. Like if they're a 15-gallon pot, the root ball does tend to be more, you know, concentrated and not, you know, always go in the right directions. You want to be more careful about looking at some root pruning, and then especially sometimes people tend to ignore that the very bottom of the root ball. You know, you might rough up the roots on this just on the sides, excuse me, but you know, looking at the bottom, make sure to disturb those as well. And I think Abby, you mentioned you can even, you know, saw it off, take a
weeding knife.
weeding knife.
Whatever tool works. But yeah, you can, I mean, you can do it. I've done it with a shovel and just like take off. If there's a thick layer of roots at the bottom of the pot, you want to just take that off entirely. Because otherwise the roots won't grow out, which is what you want, is like a really dynamic and strong root system.
Right. And then Abby, I have a question for you. Sometimes when I've done plantings, we've scored the hole itself, like just taken, you know, something and scored that, is just to give the roots more space. Is that effective? Would you recommend that, or is it really?
Yeah, you could definitely do that. I think especially because when you stick the shovel in, it kind of compacts the soil, and then you bend, it compacts the soil behind it. So that's why people do it. And that's why, I mean, the wider the hole you dig, the better, because it gives like a nice light soil medium for the roots to then expand into. So that's the idea there.
Yeah, and this diagram also reminds us the importance of having, especially right under that root ball in the center, kind of compacting the soil before you put the tree in to avoid settling. That's really important, as Abby mentioned.
Yeah, so I wanted to add that the same, all the talk that we're having with roots can also apply to when you're actually shopping for a tree. And sometimes it's hard to tell in the container the situation, what's going on with the trees. But other times, if you can see roots kind of at the top of the tree already circling around the container, that's already a really a big red flag. That should allow you to just purchase healthier trees for your planting, so you don't have to worry about it, unfortunately, dying off of on you a few years afterward.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And
then does this diagram talk about the depth of planting, or is that another one?
The depth it does a little bit.
Just the height that you want the roots to start at versus the trunk. Do you guys want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Annika. Did you want
to? Yeah, no, Abby, I think you did a good job of, like you said, before you even take it out of the pot, you know, just kind of clearing around where that root collar starts in the flare, which, like you said, on a really young tree is hard to see, but as they get older, it should be, you know, pretty obvious. And then just making sure you have those roots are going below ground, but that they're at the right height, and you're not covering over the that root collar. That's really important.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to have some of the roots exposed. It's not, people get really worried about that, but it's actually fine. Roots need oxygen. And so like having a little bit of root at the top is much better than piling a bunch on.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, I kind of wondered about that too.
Cool.
Okay, should we move on?
Yes. Okay, so let's go to mulching. So this is having the tree in the ground, and now we're backfilling. And after we backfill the soil, then mulching comes along. So what do we want to say about this? Let's see. So I guess in the diagram itself, it shows you to not mount the mulch up against the trunk of the tree. And
no mulch volcanoes.
Sorry? Oh yeah, no volcanoes.
No mulch volcanoes.
Yes, and should we maybe elaborate as to why not do that? Why should we not do that?
Same reason, yeah. Same reason as not planting it too deep. And yeah, instead of like a volcano, you can make like a little moat. So it can be higher around the outside to keep the water in when you water or irrigate. And like, I guess just in terms of how wide the mulch should go, basically the more space you give around the tree without weeds and with mulch, the happier the tree will be. So people tend to do like as wide as the crown, or like along the drip line. So like as far out as the branches go. But I did much bigger with the tree that I planted because it doesn't have a crown yet. It's too young. So I think that's it for that.
All right. And then moving on to last but not least, staking, as Abby was mentioning. And she did stress, and I want to stress again, that we don't want to stake unless we absolutely find it necessary to.
And why is that?
It won't allow the tree to establish itself if we stake too early on. Kind of just takes away from its strength in rooting, for one, or maybe even in growing. If we stake wrong, it's going to somehow deter growth. But those are some of the reasons. Are there any other ones?
I'd say you see it a lot in street trees, just because, you know, in a very urban environment, they are concerned about, you know, they'll have tree guards around the base, and they really want to make sure that, you know, they just don't always have the capacity to go and monitor that tree all the time, maybe. So they're just kind of, you know, really trying to make sure that they're kind of precautionary measures, but especially if it's just in your backyard. And for a tree that young too, like often staking ideally is kind of, like you can see on the diagram, it's up towards like the lowest permanent branch, but honestly, if it's that young, like those are all not going to be super permanent branches, most likely. So it can also kind of get in the way of the growth if you don't consider that.
Yeah, exactly. It keeps the tree from developing like a strong root system, because basically you're babying it. So you're teaching the tree that it doesn't need to have super strong roots or like a thick caliper trunk in order to stand upright. So then when you take the stakes off, the tree is like not prepared for its environment. So if you do stake, which sometimes it is totally necessary, definitely monitor the staking and the time that you do. And we're going to post these diagrams because these are helpful. It shows how you should do it low and how to have stakes on either side. And you want to make sure the wind isn't going to knock the tree into the stakes, and the material that you use to tie the tree isn't going to damage the tree, because that happens a lot. And then don't leave the stakes there forever. They only need to be as high as the tree, as the ties go. And then also, like, they don't need to be there. If you do need it right away, once the tree's established, they need to go away, because they will most likely get in the way of the tree's actual physical growth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very
important.
Cool. What else did we forget? I think that's it.
Yeah, I think we've covered.
And if y'all have any questions, then you can always message us, and we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, for sure. Abby, I don't know. I think we had a question that people sometimes have is about pruning the canopy or the branches. Want to talk about that a little bit? Like
pruning. I mean, pruning could be its own long tutorial. I didn't prune the tree that I'm growing at all yet, or that I planted, because it really doesn't have any of its permanent branches, like you mentioned. Mostly just has leaves, which is okay. That's not a problem. People think that trees should have branches right away, but it's not at the height that it needs that. So I would say, like, look at the branches. The most important thing is to make sure that there's one leader, unless you have like a red bud, something that is multi-stemmed. You want to make sure it has one strong leader. And this is another thing to consider when you're buying the tree. And if it doesn't, if you have two co-dominant leaders, like right next to each other, both going up same width, going straight upwards, and it doesn't look like there's one main structural trunk, then that's the most important thing for early stage pruning.
Right.
And then we can do more tutorials about pruning if people have more questions. Cool. Well, thanks so much, you guys. This is so fun, and we're really excited for this team and all that you guys are going to achieve. And happy Arbor Day, everyone.
Yes, happy Arbor Day. It looks like Katie.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.